Hello, welcome to Career Convos. I'm very excited to be here with James, and he has been so generous to take a few minutes to share some of his experiences with us as a MBA graduate. So thank you, James, for being here today.
Yeah, you bet. Thanks for having me, Heather.
Yeah, I really appreciate it. One of I get a lot of questions about whether or not to pursue graduate degrees, and in particular MBAs. And I think it's always helpful to hear from somebody that has been through, made that decision and been through a program, and just to get a general feel of what could be expected and what it's like. So I just wanted to ask you, first of all, where did you go to school?
Yeah, I I got my MBA through Texas A&M University,
Awesome. You
and
know that I grew up in Texas, so
I didn't know that.
yeah.
Yeah, and it was a great experience, and I was able to do it through the modern convenience of technology and remote learning. So I did it all online from Boise, Idaho, and it's been good.
Very cool. And why don't you share with us why you chose to get an MBA versus, I know your undergrad. Why don't you share a little bit about your background, I guess?
You bet. Yeah, so I'm a civil engineer. I've been working for an electric utility in engineering, and I really wanted an MBA that would highlight and focus on, at least in part, on the energy sector in the industry that I'm currently working in, and that certainly narrowed my list down to just a handful of schools. Um, and ultimately, I resonated with the curriculum and some of the emphasis that Texas A&M had to offer in the energy economics and energy finance program.
So what was it about the energy sector that appealed to you as with civil engineering?
Yeah, a lot of it's familiarity that I have with it, my experience working in it, but also energy is broad. I'm in the electrical side of it. I also have interest in the oil and gas side of it, but it had a lot to offer, at least in my eyes, to the work that I'm doing today, focusing on my current position and current company.
So you felt like it was building upon the skills that you already had started to grow and develop.
Yep, absolutely. I had that history, and also plan to continue in the same industry, so it made a lot of sense to piggyback on where I was versus where I wanted to end up.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's really good because sometimes it might be the most beneficial when you can use it to capitalize on prior experience. Then using it as a pivot might be a little bit harder. So, why don't you share with us a little bit about how the MBA program and that experience benefited you, either in your position or just in your career trajectory? What has that done to help you?
Yeah. Um, I think it benefits me on a daily basis. Currently, I'm working in project management, primarily focused on construction projects. And it provided me a set of skills that I can apply to capital budgeting, conflict resolution, support in some of the legal contracts that we deal with. It added to the skill set that I had, and I'm already seeing direct benefits of that. In addition to that, I think it does better position me moving forward for internal promotion and consideration for additional jobs that I otherwise likely wouldn't even be qualified to apply for. So long term, I do see more upside, but even in the immediate, my daily work life, I'm seeing some benefits of some of those skills that I picked up.
That's really great because I think a lot of times people might feel like, well, is it even going to benefit me in what I'm trying to do? And so it sounds like you did a lot of research in terms of looking closely at various programs to make sure you were getting something that fit with what you had already been doing. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of that was looking at the skill set that I already had. You know, I've been working as an engineer at the time when I started to apply for the program, probably 8 years of work experience. Prior to that, I had earned a master's degree in civil engineering. So I had a pretty good exposure of the technical side, good exposure to the different areas of civil engineering, but ultimately it came to a self-realization that I wanted some additional skills that could complement what I already had.
Mm.
So a lot of that was where I was, making that decision from a knowledge standpoint versus what I wanted to add to it. But I agree.
So what were some of the things that you did to really investigate the different programs? How did you talk to people, or was it mostly like an online search, or what methods did you use?
It was primarily online. I had some colleagues that I worked with that have been through some of the local programs. So prior to going outside of Idaho for that education, I spoke with them. I looked into what the local schools had to offer in terms of areas of emphasis, what some of those cohorts look like, and that's then where I expanded that search more specific for what I was looking for.
Mhm,
But
mhm.
as in terms of the means and methods of that search, it was primarily online. Ultimately, I got to the point where I started picking up the phone, looking to speak with someone at the university. Um, just part of that is feeling out how responsive that program is. Is there someone that'll pick up a phone and talk to you or not,
Mhm,
or at least respond to an email? But largely, it was a online review of what was out there.
mhm,
And maybe one comment on that. Um, I had the notion that maybe I wanted to pursue an MBA years before actually taking steps to pursue it. And I can say that in that window of time, the online MBA went from being a handful of schools that offer it versus what we see now as a much more common, much more widespread offering as these universities respond to ultimately the demand that's out there for that type of learning. So I guess if nothing else, point being, just because someone may have looked into it in the past, it's a different world today.
true,
And a lot of these universities are expanding in terms of what they can provide. So if
true.
you've looked before, don't
Yeah.
rule out a second review of that.
Okay, good advice and good thing to think about. And I love that you really had an idea of what you were trying to accomplish, that you weren't going to school just for the sake of going to school, but that you had specific ideas of why, you knew why you were doing it, and you had, defined purpose. I think that maybe made your experience that much better because you were able to select a school that really matched what you were trying to do. So why don't you talk for just a minute about what it's actually like? I mean, it's online. What's the learning style? What's the level of interaction that you experience? That obviously this is just your experience, not true of all schools, but can you speak to that for a minute?
I can, and in that in that what I was speaking to earlier, in that review of schools and what was out there, I largely saw two different styles. One would be a lockstep cohort approach where you're moving through. There's other students that you can bounce ideas off of. You're moving through in a more traditional sense of a program. And then in contrast to that, there's some self-directed learning where they put all the material out there and it's up to the person to move through the material largely on your own. The program I went it was flexible, but it was a lockstep cohort. So in terms of the time and the mechanics, on a weekly basis, work assignments were assigned to us. And that ranged from reading to writing reports to analytic summaries, whatever it was. And that was done on a weekly basis. But in order to accomplish that, I was in the program, putting in work 5 days a week, often 6 days a week. My approach was to get on it early in the morning and then follow up in the evening with comments from peers and students. If I had to guess, the workload was flexible in the sense that it changed from week to week, but somewhere between 20 20 to 30 hours a week was pretty common getting through that.
Wow.
And there were times where it would exceed that, when deadlines were coming due. But definitely a consistent uh, every day or nearly every day effort to stay on top of it. And then that work submitted online. I found great resources in terms of support, writing centers, uh, places to bounce ideas off of peers in that virtual setting. And and largely, one thing that was pretty interesting was working with people from all across the country. I had peers in Connecticut, and I had a peer in Hawaii, and we were assigned on the same project, and that's a pretty
When did you?
interesting window to try to schedule.
Yeah.
And all three of us were working professionals, so and
Yeah.
that's something to throw out there, that this was an online, largely geared and tailored around someone that had a full-time job.
Yeah.
But some programs actually require that a person walks away from full-time employment and attend a university in person. And some of those stipulate that they can't be working during that period. So just
Mhm.
other things to keep in mind. Mine was certainly a more flexible, tailored to a working professional.
Mhm. And do you feel that you were able to cultivate relationships with peers? Like when I think about going to to a regular campus, and working in a cohort, you would get to know people. So how was that? Did you make connections or network, or was it a little bit more difficult?
I did. And at first, you're working with strangers, and like anything, either in work or school, it's typically a team project. A lot of these big assignments. And at first, I didn't know anyone in there. And with time, it was interesting that the teacher no longer. At first, the teacher would assign a team. Like, you're on a team with these people. By the end of it, it was find a team, tell us who that team is, and then do the assignment. So yes, those relationships were developed. People, whether it be personality types or working styles, people found other students they worked well with, and assembled teams. So in fact, I worked on multiple projects and multiple classes with the same group of people. And even post graduation, I've stayed in touch with a couple of those students and even bounced ideas off of them. Not related to what we did in school at all, but just from a business and professional standpoint.
Yeah.
So yeah, that surprisingly, I guess surprising to me that, with time working through that, that I was able to develop some pretty meaningful personal relationships.
I think that's really encouraging because maybe that would be something that somebody would make them hesitate. So I think that is really good to know. And what about the school offering any kind of career support? So at the end of your experience, what kind of career guidance or support did they offer at
Sure.
in your experience?
And I think for a lot of people looking into the MBA program, they likely fall in one of two categories. One, they're looking for a complete pivot away from a current job, a current career, into something new, or probably also very common, someone like myself, not looking for a pivot, but looking to add to that. So recognizing that I was in that latter category of I'm happy in my industry, I'm actually happy in my current job, but as far as career opportunities and support and networking, there's still a lot of value in that. for example, we worked on a couple of projects where the project sponsor wasn't the university, it was an actual company. One was a Fortune 500 company that interfaced with the university and put a project out there that was actually a real project. We worked with the corporate sponsor of the project, and ultimately, people on our team that worked on that were offered a job with this corporation.
Oh, yeah.
And had I been in that category of looking for a new career change, that would have been incredibly valuable.
Mhm.
A company that I wouldn't have even thought to have looked for employment with my skill set. Doors were open in that regard. In addition to that, the university itself had staffing professionals that worked, and not headhunters, but definitely people that were in that communication with, again, local companies local to the university,
Mhm.
companies within that industry, within the energy, oil and gas industry. So a lot of doors there. So I think that networking is very valuable, and there are a lot of tools out there within a university that far exceed what a person just searching the internet could come across.
Yeah, and the university acts as, a place to bring those 2 parties together, and so also picking a school that's in an energy sector environment that has these partnerships that works probably not just in your program, but many energy programs throughout the whole university. So kind
Yep.
of knowing the location of your college that you're considering and what partnerships that might, if you're needing a career pivot or needing a lot of career opportunity at the end, then maybe that's something to consider more.
Yep, absolutely. And in that vein, when we got into the specialty courses towards the end of the program, some of those were actually co-taught by Oklahoma State University in addition to Texas A&M. So it's just that much more expansion in the students you're interacting with, and again, the exposure, the professors of yet another university that you're communicating and talking with, and a lot of that's due to the narrowness of scope and focus of the degree I pursued. But at
Mhm,
the same time, it's that much more expansion of that network.
mhm. Awesome. I think that's a really good way to approach it. So what would your advice be to someone that is considering looking at getting an MBA?
Yeah, I think my advice. Okay, I guess I have a couple points of advice.
Okay.
One, I view it, at least for me, life seems to always be increasing in busyness and things to do and obligations, whether it be within the family or community involvement. So for me, if you're right on the edge and you're close to making that decision, maybe just bear that in mind that typically life isn't going to get easier. You're
Mm,
not going to have more free time than you do now. So that was something that pushed me over the edge. Um, other advice, I found that I was happier, not just in accomplishing, a degree in this education, but I actually found enjoyment in that work, work being the schoolwork. So maybe that'd be some self-reflection for someone. If you hated school your whole life and you hated high school
yeah.
and you didn't like your undergrad, going back to school might not be the best choice
Yeah.
for someone that just can't stand the schoolwork.
Yeah.
And that's something that, I had to come to a realization that I actually, despite what I said as a teenager, I actually learned to enjoy school and I enjoyed learning. So maybe just some honest self-reflection of where a person is in that regard. Another comment is it's not easy. They don't give that away. There's prerequisite testing, there's in coursework testing, there's exit exams, and it's stressful and it's not easy. But for me, ultimately, it was extremely valuable, and I enjoyed it.
Mm. So was there anything that was unexpected about your MBA experience? Like maybe something that was surprising or you were caught off guard maybe against
Yeah,
your expectation?
as an engineer, I knew what I'd been through as an undergrad and a engineering grad student, and that was, solving problems, lots of written math, science, engineering type work. What definitely was new and surprising and challenging for me was the expectation of the volume of reading that was being assigned.
Mm,
There were weeks where we'd get assigned hundreds of pages of textbook or uh, even not textbook, but supporting books that would help teach whatever subject we were studying, and just the copious amounts of reading. That was new, and some people may have experienced that in their undergrad, but as an engineer, I was more focused on a completely different way of learning. So
mm.
learning via reading in copious amounts, that was
Yeah.
certainly a shock to the system.
So get used to reading if you're gonna consider this.
Yep.
All right. Now, another last kind of question kind of comes from people that I've worked with, and they have said, I've always thought about running a business. I have these interests, but I don't really have a business background. But I've thought about going to get my MBA because I already have my undergrad. And so I just wondered, I know that your degree was very specific to energy, but in what is your impression as about how an MBA could or prepare you for running a business? I guess I would just like you to speak to if you feel like there's a way that it does or what your feeling is if it would prepare you for that kind of work.
Sure. And I'm gonna take the most vague response I can and
Okay.
say
Okay.
it depends.
Yeah.
It probably depends. It certainly depends on the skills that a person already has. For example, um, I had no formal accounting training, no formal uh, finance training. I learned some stuff on the job, but I've never taken college level, graduate level coursework in those arenas. And I think that exposure to me to then go and turn and run a business would be invaluable.
Mhm.
Someone that maybe already has a economics or finance or business undergraduate, they may already have enough broad exposure to where they could pick up and go run a startup business of their own without having the need for corporate level accounting practices and all the nuance and detailed uh, exposure that you're going to get in a graduate coursework. So I'd say generally, maybe more directly to answer your question, that yes, I do find that would be valuable for a person, and maybe less specifics, the accounting and the day in day out operation of a business, but maybe at a broader level when someone starts to look at strategy, when you start to do analysis, identifying strengths, weakness, opportunities, threats to an industry, to a business, just training yourself and being educated in how best to approach and look at um, those items that certainly are going to impact the success of a business. I think all that is very valuable for a person to start a business. So I would say yes. I would say that there's going to be things that are learned and that are taught that will be valuable for a person.
And perhaps, as we were speaking before, looking for a program that maybe more caters to an entrepreneurial slant or
Absolutely.
something like that would be even the most beneficial, and you might get a greater return on your investment um, doing it that way. Well,
Yep.
thank you so much. I feel like this is just invaluable for people that are considering, and I know it's one person's experience, but just to give an overview like that from somebody that's recently been through and made that decision, and that it's been very beneficial for you, I think might inspire somebody else to consider it as an option and help them to know what to look for if they choose to do so. So I appreciate your time today, James.
Yeah, you bet. Thank
Okay,
you. It
take
was a
care.
pleasure. Thanks.
Thanks.
This episode of Career Convos is brought to you by Aligned Ambition. If you're looking for help while preparing to enter the workforce, need tools to build your resume, or are looking for guidance in finding a career path that is a great fit for you and your personal strengths, click on the link in the show notes to learn more about what Aligned Ambition has to offer.